Jasper Johns is going to be pivotal in the early development of pop art. Now, his basic idea, his basic principle behind his work is going to be that he seeks to draw attention to very common objects. It could be anything from symbols, such as the target, to typography, which we see here with numbers, but he's always looking at simple objects and trying to draw our attention to things that we might otherwise simply pass by. And this is going to be really apparent in his work, Flag. Now, what we see here is an American flag that would be current in 1954. And it depicts an image often seen but rarely scrutinized. What he's doing here is he's calling our attention to the design of the American flag, something that we see driving to school or driving to work or driving wherever all over the place. We see it in front of car dealerships, banks, homes. But do we ever stop and think about the design that went into it, the work that went into it throughout its history? And that's really what Johns is doing. He's saying, hey, look at this. Let's consider it as a piece of art. And the best way to do that is to create a version of that that really fits in that high art setting. So he's taking what we would consider as commercial art or low art, the design of a flag, something ubiquitous and common, and he's translating it into high art. Now, what he's done is he's created Flag in encaustic paints, giving the surface a characteristic impasto, or texture, which we see throughout the work. And you can see that texture here. Now, encaustics are basically melted wax, so they not only have that texture, but they're also unusual. They draw us in because it's not a texture that we're used to seeing in a lot of art, again calling our attention to this very basic form of the flag. He also lines the board underneath with a collage of newspapers underlying the image, and as a way creating a translucent surface in the wax so you can see this newspaper through it. And it becomes apparent in the final work. The question is, why is it there? Why newspaper? Why not brown paper bags? Why not just blank white paper? Well, think about this. It's being done in 1954. What's happening at that time? Well, we've just finished, or just finishing, the Korean War. Now, after World War II, no one questioned the authenticity and sort of the spectacular nature of the United States. You can't really argue that the United States did a lot of wrong in World War II, or at least that's not how people would have seen it at the time. It's not like Vietnam or Iraq or any number of other far more controversial issues that we've gotten into. So, what happened in Korea? Well, we get involved in a United Nations, what's considered a police action. It grows and develops from simply holding back the North Koreans to ultimately trying to hold back the Chinese and the Russians, a proxy war. It's a big mess. And it changes how people view the American military and the American flag. And the newspaper is there to reflect the idea that our interpretation of this simple symbol, the flag, can be altered by the news and the things that we're learning about the United States. So there are times where you may be particularly patriotic. The United States has done something phenomenal, something great. But he's also reflecting the idea that sometimes the United States gets tied into things that we'd rather it weren't. And that affects the way we interpret the flag. We suddenly don't look at it with a sense of patriotism. Some people might even look at it with a sense of scorn, as if the nationalism and patriotism embodied in this flag is somehow wrong based on different decisions that have been made throughout American history. And so that's really getting at the interpretation. It's not only taking a flag, a basic, ubiquitous, common object, moving it into a museum and asking us to look at its design and look at it as high art, but it's also drawing out the idea that we look at certain symbols and interpret them differently based on our surroundings, based on the news, on information that we're provided, and that interpretation can change based on that background information.